Welcome to the Women in Wealth podcast, brought to you by Regina McCann-Hess, a certified financial planner with over 2 decades of experience. This show is for professional women who want guidance in working towards their retirement vision in learning, building, planning, striving for your dreams, and putting the work in now so that you can pursue your financial independence. Hello, I'm Regina McCann-Hess, president of Forge Wealth Management, and welcome to our Women in Wealth series. Today, we're going to talk about transfers of wealth. And what does that mean? Basically, the money you leave behind when you go to the great big beyond. And it's obviously not a fun topic. Nobody really wants to talk about death, but there's sometimes a lot of money at stake. And if you do it properly, it can avoid maybe some headaches for the people you leave behind. If you maybe take some shortcuts, it could create a lot of drama and a lot of cost between family members. So we're just going to talk about a few tips that could help you. Obviously, this is something, that you want to get further in depth with your financial advisor and also an estate planning attorney, because they're going to know the legal ins and outs of how you do things properly. Whereas a financial advisor is going to talk to you about the financial side of things and maybe communicating with your family in a better way and, helping facilitate some of those conversations sometimes. And the lawyers may do that as well. But bottom line is you worked hard for your money. You did a lot of work to save it. It's easy to spend. It's hard to save, right? But over your lifetime, you have saved a lot of money. And now you want it to go to maybe the next generation or a nonprofit, wherever you want your money to go. We want to make sure it is done right. So obviously, leaving it to loved ones or nonprofit groups, you might be thinking, no problem. My will is signed, sealed, delivered, and my attorney has it and we're all good, right? Maybe. Sometimes there are parts of the will that you need to follow up on and do some other work, like maybe matching your beneficiaries in your retirement accounts to match what you have in your will. I see that mistake a lot. But there's a couple other, trap doors that you could fall in if you're not following some of the things through. So we're going to kind of talk about successful transfer of wealth, including how to protect against, I should say, it being contested, your will being contested, and hopefully avoiding some mistakes that could legally supersede your will and help ensure that your money hopefully outlasts you. So the first place that we start is, going back to your visions and values. What better way to cement your legacy than looking at your core values? It's also important to approach the final transfer of wealth with those same intentions. So when it comes to this kind of legacy, people often think about naming, buildings and donor plaques and, other spaces. It could be as big as that or as small as, hey, I want to help the nonprofit down the street, or I want to make sure my family members are okay. Every little bit that I can do for them may help them. But legacy can also be about how you take care of your family and loved ones, going on after you're not here. And it's rarely as simple as dividing everything evenly. I have 3 kids, and there is really no way to divide everything evenly. And even if there was, sometimes that's not really the right way to do it. It just depends on the situation. Now, a lot of people have legitimate misgivings about leaving large sums to, family members or friends. For one thing, you may have a special needs child who lacks the legal capacity to manage their finances. Plus, if you have a child with special needs and they're getting any kind of government assistance, putting money directly in their name could definitely create some problems and could potentially take away those benefits for them, which I know are very well hard fought to get. So that's a mistake we don't want to make. And in those cases, you definitely, aside from just an estate planning attorney, you want to speak to somebody who is a special needs attorney who has that niche, because it's a very, very special niche. And there's a lot that goes into that. You could also have an adult child who struggles with addiction or simply is just reckless with money. So there's a lot of things to think about. And even without those concerns, wealth transfer, they can get sticky. For example, if you've spent more on one child than the others and you want to make up that difference through an inheritance, I've seen people erroneously assume the wishes of their beneficiaries. In other words, leaving a vacation house to the child who has zero interest in the property over the ones who have secretly longed for that. Situations like those are more likely to result in contested wills and costly legal proceedings. So, a lot of times, and I'll probably say this a couple times during this webinar or podcast, it is goes back to communication. Communicating ahead of time really helps avoid some mistakes. Having conversations with your family members, discussing, hey, look, we have the shore house, or we have the mountain house, or we have this, or we have that. Is that something that you would want part of, or does it make sense for us to sell it and just split the money amongst, whoever your beneficiaries are? Those are great conversations to have so that there's not a lot of big surprises when it actually happens. Now, obviously, it's your money. You can do whatever you want. You're not legally required to defend or even explain your reasonings, and your wishes don't have to make sense to anyone but you. That being said, when heirs feel blindsided by the terms of a will, or when wealth transfers get muddy pretty quickly, you can follow proper legal guidelines, align all of your account beneficiaries to your will, and still leave behind a mess of family rifts that could drain your estate through bitter legal proceedings. And let me tell you, I'm not talking there has to be a lot of digits or a lot of zeros at the end of that. It could be over hundreds of dollars, or thousands of dollars, or hundreds of thousands of dollars. People get funny around money and death. It is a really sad sight to see, and it is very common to see it happen. I mean, I've seen families rift over this when it could have, in some cases it could have been avoided. Not in all cases, but in sometimes you can avoid it. So these are things where I keep going back to, dot your I's, cross your T's, do everything you can. But again, let's go back to the communication. Let's loop the adult children in as early as possible when it comes to your wishes for both long-term and estate planning, like your own long term, like as you get older, what do you want to happen for your care? What's important to you? And also your estate planning, like, hey, these are my wishes. They are written in a will, but I want you to know what those wishes are so that you understand what's in there and why it's in there. Obviously you could say, hey, well, it's my will, I can do whatever I want. That's absolutely right. But I advocate for communication, not because I want your beneficiaries to make or influence your decisions. The idea is making sure that the beneficiaries or the future beneficiaries understand, accept, and carry out those wishes with the least possible drama. We are no drama llamas over here. We try to avoid it as much as possible. And again, communication in many cases helps avoid some drama. So, having conversations about this in advance, sometimes the survivors or the beneficiaries are far less likely to feud over the details. So, obviously, some of those conversations can get pretty tense. Sometimes I sit in on those family conversations. Sometimes there are professional mediators who sit through those conversations. If you're expecting a big, problem with the conversation, or you need somebody to navigate the conversation for you, sometimes your estate planning attorney may sit through those conversations with you. The best part of that is if you have somebody in those conversations, you call it the family meeting. You have it documented that they've all attended. They've all heard what you're saying. They've all heard what your wishes are. And they all know, where they stand, what they are expected to inherit, and why, and maybe why not. But that is a documented conversation. And I would imagine that it's going to be a little bit more difficult for somebody to challenge the will if it's been documented that they were part of a family conversation regarding your will ahead of time, and there's not really a surprise there. So obviously anybody can sue over everything, but if you have documentation like that, it may help mitigate some of that. Okay. All right. So, you may want to explain your will in advance. It's obviously something that's very private. It is your will, but again, it can help decrease some of that contesting of the document in court. That obviously, if it does get contested, that's a lot of time and money that is drained from your estate over sometimes silly amounts, like silly small, and sometimes silly big. But either way, if you can, protect that money for the intended heirs as opposed to the court system, that is even better. And I can tell you, I've actually seen very close-knit families torn apart because some people deny that, that was the intention of the will. They deny that the will was documented accurately or reflects the wishes of the parents, and sometimes there's bitterness, disappointment. Obviously you can't mitigate everything, and there may be some disappointments with some of your beneficiaries, but if you can get ahead of that, and doesn't mean you're going to make everybody happy, nor hey, again, it's your money. You don't have to make everybody happy. But maybe it helps decrease the drama llama again. Okay. So it also helps, when the executor is trying to execute everything, it could potentially decrease the quote of, somebody saying, hey, the executor is trying to steal money, and they're moving more to their pile. You try to avoid those conversations as well. Here's the problem with this advice. The advice of having this open communication is challenging our status quo, our taboo culture. We're not allowed to talk about money. We generally don't talk about money as a family. We were raised not to talk about money as a family. But now we're saying, hey, talk to your family about money. Obviously, it is a very hard new, element to bring into the family, but it could be a very healthy element to bring into the family and create new patterns and new behaviors, especially when it comes to people we love. We want to make sure that, they understand what we're doing. Also, sometimes they may be inheriting a lot of money or a lot of money to them. And if they're educated ahead of time about, like, hey, these are our values, this is what we're doing, and this is why, this is what you're getting, maybe it helps them handle the money when it is in their hands, and they've gotten maybe a little bit of direction from you and a little bit of education of how to handle their money. The other thing you may want to do is write a letter. In addition to the family conversation, you may want to write a letter to be opened by the beneficiaries at your death. And also sometimes videos work too. If you're not comfortable writing something, you can create a video. You can just do it from your phone, your computer. It doesn't have to be, choreographed or anything like that. Again, that's just another way to communicate. But again, most transfers fail because of lack of communication. So this is why we're, kind of pounding the table on this a little bit. And it helps hopefully avoid infighting and legal battles, or maybe decreases it a little bit. But even when everyone accepts the terms of the will, things can get off track. Sometimes the problems is as simple as not updating significant changes like birth of new grandkids or death of a major beneficiary or a divorce or a marriage. Sometimes people forget to align their beneficiaries or on other accounts with their will. Sometimes they don't align them on purpose. I've been in that situation with people. That's a little tedious, but it happens. Again, it's your money. Finally, I've also seen situations where people are, they're diligently earning and saving and investing, and then they have an irresponsible heir that they know is not good with money, and they're worried about them, blowing through it. And that's where education could come into play. And also you could speak to your attorney about creating a trust so that you can maintain some control over that wealth while you're gone, when you're gone, I should say. Kind of, put some parameters in there as far as how much can be spent and on what, depending on, how the will or how the trust would be set up. And I think we would actually want to have a whole podcast on trusts for an education webinar. And we would probably want to get an estate planning attorney in on that conversation, so it would add more value. So I will work on that. The other key thing I want you to think about is updating your will. Sometimes people don't update their will. It could be 10, 15 years old. It's time to update. The structure of your family has shifted. Your kids may have gotten married, they may have gotten divorced, there could be new grandkids. Maybe your wealth has like grown dramatically since you wrote your will. Maybe you have new properties, or maybe you don't have the same properties anymore. There's still changes. And even if you don't have any major relevant changes, the laws could have changed, the tax laws could have changed. You may have moved to a new state. And then if you're in a new state, you do need a new will. So those are some things that you want to think about too. Obviously, you want to create a will under legal guidance. You want to regularly touch base with both your estate planning attorney and your financial advisor to keep everyone on the same page. And you want to update your beneficiaries from your will and maybe align them with your retirement accounts, your investment accounts, insurance policies. People sometimes forget about their insurance policies. So that's something really, really important to do. And you want to make sure whoever's listed on those policies or accounts is legally the person that you want to have, because those, like if it's an insurance policy or if it's a retirement signed on an account like an IRA, those will supersede your will. It doesn't matter what your will says. Those act like contract law. So if you assign a beneficiary on your retirement account and it's Joe from up the street, and in your will it says, Jane, your daughter, Joe from up the street is getting that money because it goes by contract law and it's not going to look at your will. So that's another thing that you want to make sure, I harp on that, but I have found that mistake many, many times. Obviously, it's not Joe up the street. It's just an example. But you want to make sure that everything lines up the way that it should. Like I said, I think we could do a whole episode on trust, whether or not it's revocable, irrevocable. We can just go down a huge rabbit hole on that. So I'm going to save that for another day. But the other thing I want to remind you of that is your will is not a private document. Once you go to the courthouse and probate the will, that makes it a public record. So I don't know if you've heard about scams, but widows or widowers getting scammed out of their money because people actually go to the courthouse and look at these things and then start, stalking these people either physically or online or something like that, and they try to get the money. It's really sad, but it's a reality. It also means that your beneficiaries, whoever's in your will is your beneficiary, guess what? Everybody knows who your beneficiaries are and what they're getting because it's public. So that is an issue if you like your privacy. Also, if you are not communicating with your family and, your one child got a substantial amount more than the others, there's some fireworks that may happen as a result of that because they can all see it. So just remember that whatever you put in your will is public information once it gets, probated. So there's another win for, having a trust. And again, we'll do a separate episode on trust, but that's something to keep in mind. Life insurance policies, like I said, those are another way that you can move money that is not in the will, but you have to assign a beneficiary to those. Again, you want to just kind of see what's in your will. Do you want to align it with what's in your will and update your beneficiaries on your life insurance policies? One of the other things I just want to talk about briefly is gifting. We're talking about money going out, like with your will and a trust or whatever. We're talking about money going out like after you die. But you can give money away now. You can give money away every single year through gifting. And this year in 2025, the gifting amount is $19,000. So if myself and my husband, we can gift to our kids, each of them $19,000. So each child will get $19,000 from me, $19,000 from my husband. So, hey, we can do math, right? $38,000. Now, if they were married, we can each give that same amount to our child plus their spouse. And that's, a lot of money that we can move over to them annually. So, and it doesn't mean you have to give that much, but if you can, and you want to, it's available to you. Good thing about that is you can see them enjoy that money. You can see if they're sensible with the money or, how they're handling it. And then, maybe it decreases the amount you give them, upon your passing. Maybe it gets your, over time, obviously, gets more money out of your estate. So maybe less estate taxes. And obviously, tax laws may change at the end of 2025. So we have no idea what's going on there. So, with that, I think what we're going to do is talk about what are the action items today. And I think the action item is educating the next generation. Like if you have your kids or, nieces, nephews, whoever in your will, and you haven't had a money conversation with them, start that money conversation. Have then possibly the conversation about like, hey, here's how my will is set up and here's why, and here's the percentages that you guys are getting. The other thing about that though is besides just the percentages, percentages don't look like a lot of money on paper. 50% or 30% of, $100 isn't a lot, but 50% or 30% of a million or 2 million or $5 million, that's some real money. And depending on the, age of your adult child or where they are in their life, whether or not, they're going through a divorce or whatever, do you want them to have access to all that money? Is there a better way to do it? So those are the things I would have you think about in your call to action today. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me today. My name again is Regina McCann-Hess, president of Forge Wealth Management. My website is forgewealth.com. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Forge Wealth, and LinkedIn is Regina McCann-Hess. Thanks so much. And I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Women in Wealth podcast. You can watch the founders video I created for you to learn more about me and how I can guide you towards your financial independence at forgewealth.com. The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it's not intended to be a substitute for specific financial, legal, or tax advice. And to determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making the final decision. Securities are offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice is offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Forge Wealth Management are separate entities from the LPL Financial. Our show guests and their companies are not affiliated nor endorsed by LPL Financial, Private Advisor Group, or Forge Wealth Management. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Women in Wealth podcast. You can watch the founders video I created for you to learn more about me and how I can guide you towards your financial independence at www.forgewealth.com. The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific, individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision. Securities are offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Forge Wealth Management are separate entities from the LPL Financial. Our show guests and their companies are not affiliated with nor endorsed by LPL Financial, Private Advisor Group, or Forge Wealth Management.